You people are invisible, he slurred, his voice cutting through the soft jazz like something sharp dropped on a glass. And for a second, the entire restaurant stopped breathing. The clink of silverware faded. A server froze mid-step. Even the bartender paused with a glass still half-polished under the amber lights. Ava Brooks didn't look up right away. Her hand kept moving in slow, steady circles across the table, the scent of lemon cleaner rising faintly as she wiped away a ring of spilled whiskey. She had heard worse. Not louder, not necessarily meaner, but worse in the way words could land when people thought you didn't matter. The man at the center of it all, Daniel Whitmore, sat slouched in a leather booth that cost more than Ava's monthly rent. His tie hung loose around his neck, collar open, eyes glassy and unfocused as he gestured vaguely toward no one and everyone at once. A billionaire, someone had whispered earlier in the shift, the kind of man whose name was printed on buildings and contracts and decisions that never reached people like her. Now he was just another drunk guest who had stayed too long, tipped too little, and said too much. Sir, maybe it's time to call it a night. One of the junior servers had tried, her voice careful, rehearsed. He laughed at that, a low, uneven sound that didn't carry humor so much as something hollow. You don't tell me when it's time, he muttered, reaching for his glass and missing it by an inch, his fingers brushing the edge before the glass tipped and spilled again, amber liquid bleeding across the white tablecloth like a quiet mistake. No one rushed forward this time. They had all stepped back just enough to pretend distance, just enough to make it someone else's problem. Ava finally lifted her eyes. Not sharply, not dramatically. Just a small shift, her gaze steady, taking in the scene the way she always did, like a camera that never blinked, catching details no one else bothered to see. The slight tremor in his hand. The way his shoulders sagged not from arrogance, but from something heavier. The silence around him that wasn't respect, but avoidance. She set the cloth down, folded it once, then again, precise, controlled. Her apron was slightly damp near the hem, her shoes worn but clean, her name tag catching a sliver of light as she stepped away from the table she'd been cleaning. Ava, her co-worker whispered from behind the bar, a warning tucked into her tone. Don't get involved. Ava didn't answer. She moved anyway. Slow steps across polished hardwood, the soft echo of her shoes barely louder than the music returning in hesitant notes. By the time she reached his table, Daniel had leaned back too far in the booth, his head tipping slightly, as if gravity had become optional. His eyes flickered toward her, unfocused at first, then narrowing like he was trying to place her in a world that didn't usually include people like her. What? He said, voice rough. You gonna tell me to leave too? Ava shook her head once, calm, almost gentle. No, sir. Her voice didn't rise, didn't challenge. It settled into the space between them like something steady. I was just going to help you up. He let out a short breath, not quite a laugh, not quite resistance. Help me, he repeated, like the word didn't belong in the same sentence as him. His hand slipped from the edge of the table as he tried to push himself up, missing his balance by just enough that the motion stalled halfway. For a moment, no one moved. Not the staff watching from a distance. Not the manager pretending to check receipts. Just Ava, standing there, her hand hovering for a fraction of a second before she reached forward, not grabbing, not forcing, just offering. And in that small, almost invisible pause, something shifted. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet decision made in a room full of people who had already decided not to care. Daniel's fingers hovered in the air for a second longer than they should have, like his body had forgotten how to trust anything that was not control, and then slowly, almost reluctantly, they settled into Ava's open palm. His grip was not strong, not commanding like someone used to shaking hands in boardrooms and signing deals worth more than most people would see in a lifetime. It was uneven, unsteady, the weight of him shifting forward as he tried to stand, and the booth resisted for just a second before releasing him into motion. The leather creaked softly behind him. The room watched without watching. Ava adjusted her stance instinctively, one foot slightly back, her other hand lifting just enough to steady his elbow without making it feel like she was holding him up. Easy, she said, her voice low, steady, the kind of tone that did not ask for permission but did not take anything either. He exhaled through his nose, a slow breath that carried the sharp scent of whiskey and something heavier, something tired. I am fine, he muttered, though his balance disagreed with him almost immediately, his shoulder dipping before he corrected himself with a small, frustrated shake of his head. Ava did not argue. She had learned a long time ago that people like him did not need to be told they were not fine. They needed space to realize it on their own. The music in the background resumed its rhythm, softer now, like the room had decided to move on without acknowledging what had just happened. A couple at the far table leaned closer to each other, their conversation picking back up in hushed tones. Glasses clinked again. The world continued, but slower, like it was still watching from the corner of its eye. Ava guided him away from the booth, step by careful step across the polished floor, her hand never tightening, never pulling, just present enough to keep him from drifting too far off balance. The overhead lights reflected faintly off the surface beneath them, catching the movement of their feet, the slight drag in his step, the controlled rhythm in hers. "Where is your car, sir?" she asked after a moment, her gaze forward, not on him, giving him the dignity of not being studied. He let out a short breath that almost turned into a laugh, but stopped halfway. "Somewhere," he said. "Driver left. I told him to." His words blurred at the edges, but the meaning held. Ava nodded once, already calculating. It was past midnight. The street outside would be quieter now, colder, the kind of cold that settled into the bones after standing too long. She glanced toward the entrance where the glass doors reflected the dim glow of streetlights and passing headlights streaking by in soft lines. "Then we will call you a ride," she said. He did not respond right away. His head tilted slightly, like he was listening to something far away, something not in the room. For a second, his hand tightened around hers, not hard, just enough to register. "She used to say that," he murmured, the words slipping out softer than anything he had said all night. Ava did not ask who. She did not need to. There was a shift in his voice, a quiet crack that did not belong to anger or arrogance. It belonged to memory. They reached the front of the restaurant, the cool air from the automatic doors brushing lightly against their skin as they slid open with a soft mechanical hum. Outside, the night stretched wide and still, the city lights glowing against the dark sky, the pavement slightly damp from earlier rain, reflecting everything in blurred gold and white. Ava guided him to the curb, the faint sound of distant traffic filling the space between them. She released his arm only long enough to pull her phone from her apron pocket, her fingers moving quickly, practiced. The app loaded slowly, the small spinning circle reflecting in the glass of the screen. Behind them, through the window, the restaurant carried on, warm and bright, already forgetting. In front of them, the night waited, quiet and indifferent. "It will be here in 4 minutes, she said, slipping the phone back into her pocket. Daniel shifted his weight again, his gaze drifting somewhere past the street, past the lights, like he was looking at something that was not there anymore. "You did not have to do this," he said after a moment, his voice lower now, stripped of the earlier edge. Ava glanced at him briefly, then back at the street. "I know," she replied simply. The answer landed between them, uncomplicated, unadorned, and for the first time that night, Daniel did not have anything to say back. The headlights appeared first, sliding across the wet pavement in a slow arc before the car itself turned the corner, a dark sedan moving with quiet precision as it approached the curb where Ava and Daniel stood. The engine hummed low, steady, controlled, a sharp contrast to the uneven rhythm of Daniel's breathing beside her. He shifted again, one hand brushing against the side of the car as if he needed to confirm it was real, something solid, something he could rely on. Ava stepped forward slightly, opening the rear door before the driver could even reach for the handle, her movement smooth, practiced in a way that did not draw attention to itself. "Your ride is here," she said, her tone unchanged, calm, neutral, as if this moment carried no weight at all. Daniel looked at the open door, but did not move right away. The warm interior light spilled out onto the sidewalk, soft and inviting, illuminating the lines of his face more clearly now. Up close, the confidence people associated with his name was not there. In its place was something quieter, something worn down. "You are not coming?" he asked, the question simple, almost childlike in its directness. Ava shook her head once. "No, sir. This is where I get off." He studied her for a second longer, as if trying to understand something that did not fit into the categories he was used to. His hand lifted slightly, hovering in the space between them, then fell back to his side. "I do not know your name," he said. Ava hesitated for just a fraction of a second, then answered, "Ava." He repeated it under his breath, slower this time, like he was placing it somewhere he would not forget. "Ava." The name lingered in the air for a moment before he finally stepped forward, lowering himself into the back seat with less resistance than before. The leather shifted softly beneath him. Ava reached for the door, but before she could close it, he spoke again, his voice quieter now, almost steady. "I will make this right." The words sounded automatic, something he had said 1,000 times in 1,000 different situations, but there was a hesitation behind them, like even he was not sure what right meant in this moment. Ava met his eyes briefly, not challenging, not agreeing, just present. "You do not owe me anything," she said. Then she closed the door gently, the sound soft but final. The car idled for a second longer before pulling away from the curb, its taillights fading into the stream of red and white lights down the street until it disappeared completely. Ava stood there for a moment after it was gone, the night settling back into place around her, the faint chill of the air brushing against her arms. The city moved on, as it always did. A distant siren echoed somewhere far off. A couple laughed as they passed behind her. The glass doors of the restaurant slid open again, letting out a brief wave of warmth and light before closing. With a soft click. Inside, nothing had changed. The same music. The same conversations. The same rhythm of plates and footsteps and quiet expectations. Ava took a breath, steady, controlled, and turned back toward the entrance. Her shoes made a soft sound against the floor as she stepped inside, the scent of polished wood and citrus cleaner wrapping around her again like something familiar. No one asked where she had been. No one needed to. She moved back to her section, picking up the folded cloth she had left behind, unfolding it with careful hands before returning to the table that still held the faint outline of a glass that was no longer there. The ring of moisture had begun to dry, leaving behind a subtle mark that caught the light at just the right angle. Ava wiped it away in slow, even strokes until the surface was clean again, reflecting the overhead lights without distortion. Somewhere in the back, someone called her name, asking for help with a late order. She answered without hesitation, her voice steady, her steps measured. The night continued. Orders came and went. Plates were cleared. Tips were counted. By the time her shift ended, the sky outside had begun to lighten just enough to soften the edges of the buildings across the street. Ava stepped out into the early morning air, her breath visible for a moment before fading, her coat pulled tighter around her as she walked toward the bus stop at the corner. The street was quieter now, the city in that brief pause between night and day. She sat down on the cold metal bench, her hands resting in her lap, her gaze fixed somewhere ahead, but not focused on anything in particular. Cars passed occasionally, their tires hissing softly against the damp road. She did not think about the man, not about his name, not about his promise. Some things, she had learned, were not meant to be carried. And so she let the moment stay where it belonged, somewhere behind her, fading into the same quiet space as everything else she had done simply because it felt right. The bus arrived with a soft hiss of brakes, its doors folding open in a slow, mechanical sigh that cut through the early morning quiet, and Ava stepped inside without hesitation, her shoes carrying a faint trace of the night's work. As she moved down the narrow aisle and took a seat near the middle, the vinyl cooled beneath her as the bus pulled away from the curb and merged into the thin stream of traffic beginning to build. The city looked different at this hour, softer, like it had not fully decided what kind of day it was going to be yet. Streetlights flickered off one by one, and the sky shifted from deep blue to something lighter, something uncertain. Ava rested her hands in her lap, her fingers still faintly smelling of citrus cleaner and polished wood, a scent that clung no matter how many times she washed them. She did not mind it. It reminded her that she had made it through another shift, another night, another set of moments that passed without needing to be remembered. The bus rolled through familiar streets, past storefronts still closed, past a diner with lights already on, past a gas station where someone stood pumping fuel with slow, tired movements. Ava watched it all without really focusing, her gaze steady but distant, her thoughts quiet. When her stop came, she rose smoothly, pulling the cord with a soft click before stepping off onto the sidewalk. The air colder here, sharper, carrying the faint smell of morning dew and concrete. Her apartment building stood a short walk away, a 3-story structure with peeling paint and narrow windows that reflected the pale light of dawn. She climbed the stairs without rushing, each step measured, her hand brushing lightly against the railing that had long since lost its finish. Inside, the hallway was dim, the overhead light flickering slightly as she passed beneath it, the sound of a television murmuring faintly behind one of the doors. Ava unlocked her apartment and stepped inside, the space small but clean, everything in its place, everything accounted for. A single lamp cast a warm glow across the room, illuminating the couch where a folded blanket rested neatly, the small kitchen where dishes were already drying on a rack, the table where a stack of bills sat untouched but not ignored. She set her keys down quietly, slipping off her shoes near the door before moving toward the bedroom where her mother slept, the door slightly ajar. Ava paused at the threshold, her hand resting lightly against the frame as she looked inside. Her mother lay still beneath the covers, her breathing slow and even, the soft rise and fall of her chest steady in the dim light. Ava stepped in just enough to adjust the blanket where it had slipped, tucking it gently around her shoulders before stepping back again, careful not to make a sound. In the kitchen, she filled a glass of water, the faucet running for a second longer than necessary before she turned it off, the silence returning immediately after. She leaned against the counter, taking a slow sip, her eyes closing briefly as the coolness settled. The night had ended, just like all the others. No different, no heavier, no lighter. She set the glass down and moved to the small table, pulling out one of the chairs and sitting down, her fingers brushing over the edges of the envelopes stacked there. Rent, utilities, medical bills. The numbers were familiar, predictable in a way that made them easier to face, even when they did not change. Ava reached for a pen, uncapping it with a soft click as she made a small note on one of the envelopes, her handwriting neat, controlled, each letter formed with care. Outside, a car passed, its tires humming briefly against the road before fading into the distance. The light through the window grew stronger, casting a pale glow across the table, across her hands, across the quiet space she had built piece by piece. There was no sign of anything unusual, no interruption, no reminder of the man from the night before, no echo of his voice or his promise, just the steady rhythm of a life that moved forward whether anyone noticed or not. Ava capped the pen and set it down, her fingers resting for a moment longer on the paper before she stood, the chair sliding back with a soft sound. She crossed the room and turned off the lamp, letting the natural light take over, filling the space slowly, gently, without asking permission. Then she walked toward the bedroom again, the day already beginning before she had even had the chance to rest, and in the quiet stillness of that small apartment, nothing suggested that anything was about to change. The alarm did not ring so much as hum softly from the small clock on Ava's nightstand, a low vibration that blended into the quiet morning until her eyes opened without urgency, without resistance, as if her body had already decided it was time to move before the sound had fully formed. She lay still for a second, staring at the ceiling where the light from the window traced faint lines across the surface, shifting slowly as the sun rose higher. The air in the room carried a slight chill, the kind that lingered in early hours before the day settled in. Ava turned her head slightly toward the doorway, listening. The apartment was quiet. No sudden movement. No unexpected sound. Just the steady rhythm of breathing from the other room and the distant hum of traffic beginning to build outside. She pushed the blanket back and sat up, her feet touching the floor with a soft, familiar contact, grounding, real. There was no hesitation in her movements. No lingering thought from the night before. She stood, straightened the edge of the bed with a quick, practiced motion, and reached for her uniform hanging neatly on the back of a chair. The fabric was clean, pressed as best as it could be, the name tag catching a small glint of light as she lifted it. Ava dressed in silence, each motion efficient, intentional, the routine unchanged from any other day. In the kitchen, she moved with the same quiet precision, placing a kettle on the stove, measuring out just enough coffee grounds, her hands steady even as the faint fatigue of the previous night lingered beneath the surface. The kettle clicked softly as it heated, a low building sound that filled the small space without overwhelming it. She poured the water slowly, watching the steam rise, the scent of coffee spreading through the room, warmer than the citrus and cleaner, something that belonged to mornings, to beginnings. Ava carried the cup to the table, setting it down beside the stack of envelopes she had organized earlier, her fingers brushing against them briefly before pulling away. There was no time to sit. Not today. Not most days. She took a small sip, just enough, then set the cup aside and moved toward the bedroom again. Her mother stirred slightly as Ava entered, her eyes opening slowly, adjusting to the light filtering through the curtains. "Morning," her mother said, her voice soft, carrying a hint of weariness that had become familiar over time. Ava smiled gently, stepping closer, adjusting the pillow behind her. "Morning," she replied, her tone warm but calm, steady in a way that did not force anything brighter than what the moment could hold. "I made coffee. I will leave some for you." Her mother nodded faintly, her gaze lingering on Ava's face for a second longer than usual. "You look tired," she said. Ava shook her head slightly. "Just a long shift." The answer came easily, not untrue, but not complete either. Her mother did not press. She rarely did. Ava reached for the small bottle of medication on the nightstand, checking the label, the dosage, the number of pills left. Her fingers paused for a moment, just long enough to count, to calculate, to adjust something silently in her mind before she handed one to her mother along with a glass of water. "We will refill this tomorrow," Ava said, her voice even. Her mother nodded again, taking the pill without question. The routine was familiar, predictable, necessary. Ava stepped back once more, her eyes scanning the room briefly, making sure everything was in place, everything accounted for, before she turned toward the door. "I will be back after my shift," she said. "Call me if you need anything." Her mother gave a small smile. "I always do." Ava returned the smile, softer this time, then stepped out into the hallway, closing the door gently behind her. The apartment felt still again, holding on to the quiet in a way that made it feel almost separate from the world outside. Ava picked up her bag, slinging it over her shoulder before reaching for her keys. The metal clicked lightly as she turned the lock, stepping out into the hallway where the flickering overhead light had steadied now, casting a dull but consistent glow. She moved down the stairs at the same measured pace as before, her hand grazing the railing, her steps neither rushed nor delayed. Outside, the day had fully arrived. Cars moved steadily along the street, people walking with purpose, the city returning to its familiar rhythm. Ava adjusted her coat slightly, pulling it closer against the morning air as she began the walk toward the bus stop again. Nothing had changed. Not in any visible way. Not in any way that would stop someone passing by from seeing just another woman on her way to work, just another day beginning like all the others. And yet, somewhere, far removed from the quiet path she walked, something had already begun to shift, unseen, unnoticed, moving slowly toward her like a moment that had not decided how it would arrive. The bus doors folded open again with that same quiet sigh, and Ava stepped down onto the familiar stretch of sidewalk in front of the hotel, the building rising above her in clean glass lines that caught the morning light and turned it into something brighter than the street deserved. It always looked different from the outside, almost unreal, like a place that did not belong to the same city as the one she lived in. Inside, it would be all polished marble, soft lighting, voices that never rose too loud, people who expected things to happen before they asked for them. Ava adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder and walked toward the entrance, her steps steady, her gaze forward, her reflection briefly appearing in the glass doors before disappearing as they slid open. The shift had not officially started yet, but the lobby was already alive in its own quiet way. A man in a tailored suit checked his watch near the front desk. A woman in a pale coat stood by the elevators, scrolling through her phone with a practiced indifference. The air carried a faint scent of fresh flowers and something citrus beneath it, layered carefully to feel expensive without being obvious. Ava moved past them without drawing attention, her presence blending into the rhythm of the place the way it always did. In the staff hallway, the lighting changed, softer, more practical, the sounds sharper, closer. Someone laughed near the lockers. A cart rolled past, wheels clicking faintly against the floor. Ava reached her locker, placing her bag inside before tying her apron with the same quick, precise motion she had done 100 times before. "You made it early," a voice said from behind her. Ava turned slightly to see Marcus leaning against the wall, his uniform already on, his expression relaxed in that way people had when they had learned not to carry the weight of every shift with them. "Bus was on time," she replied simply. He nodded, glancing at her for a second longer than necessary. "Heard you stayed late last night," he said, his tone casual, but not careless. Ava paused just long enough to acknowledge the comment without inviting more. "Someone needed help," she said. Marcus raised an eyebrow slightly, a faint smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. "That is always your answer." Ava did not respond. She finished adjusting her apron and stepped away from the locker, her hands already moving toward the small stack of order pads she kept ready. The conversation ended there, not because it had to, but because it always did. Out on the floor, the morning crowd had begun to settle into place. Coffee cups rested on tables, steam rising in thin, quiet lines. Silverware caught the light in small, precise reflections. Ava moved through it all with the same measured pace, her steps aligning with the rhythm of the room, her voice low and steady as she greeted guests, took orders, refilled cups without needing to be asked. Nothing about the morning suggested anything unusual. No one looked at her twice. No one paused in conversation as she passed. The world continued in its expected patterns, predictable, contained. Near the far end of the dining area, a table had just been cleared, the faint outline of a plate still visible in the reflection of the polished surface. Ava approached, cloth in hand, her movements automatic, controlled. She wiped the table in slow, even strokes, the scent of cleaner rising again, familiar, grounding. As she reached the edge of the table, something caught her attention, not in a way that demanded focus, but enough to shift her gaze slightly toward the entrance. The glass doors had opened again, but this time the movement around them felt different. Not louder, not dramatic, just slower. A man in a dark suit stepped inside first, his posture straight, his expression neutral in a way that suggested purpose rather than routine. Behind him, another followed, carrying a slim leather folder held carefully at his side. The front desk staff adjusted almost immediately, their posture sharpening, their voices lowering into something more formal, more precise. Ava's hand paused for a fraction of a second against the table before continuing the motion, the cloth gliding across the surface as if nothing had changed. But the air had shifted. Subtle, almost invisible, the kind of shift you felt before you understood it. One of the managers moved quickly across the lobby, his pace controlled but urgent enough to be noticed if someone was paying attention. Ava did not turn fully. She did not stare. She simply finished the table, folded the cloth once, then again, her fingers steady, her breathing even. Whatever was happening at the entrance did not belong to her. Not yet. And so she returned to her work, her steps measured, her voice calm, even as something unseen continued to move closer, quiet as a shadow stretching across the floor. The manager's shoes made almost no sound against the marble, but the urgency in his movement carried anyway, a quiet ripple that moved through the lobby without a single word being spoken, and Ava felt it more than she saw it. The way people straightened just slightly, the way voices softened without being asked. She did not turn fully. She did not stop working. But her awareness shifted, like a lens adjusting focus without changing the frame. At the front desk, the man in the dark suit spoke in a low, controlled tone, his words too quiet to carry but firm enough to command attention. The leather folder in his colleague's hand was placed gently on the counter, opened with care, papers inside aligned with precision that suggested preparation, intention, something official. The receptionist nodded once, her posture tightening, her fingers moving quickly across the keyboard before she picked up the phone and spoke softly into the receiver. Ava finished wiping the table, the cloth moving in steady circles until the surface reflected the ceiling lights without distortion, then folded it once, twice, her hands calm even as the air around her shifted again. "Ava," Marcus called quietly from a few tables over, his tone different now, less casual, more alert. She glanced up briefly. "Manager wants you," he added, nodding subtly toward the front. Ava's gaze followed the direction for just a second before returning to Marcus. "Now," she asked, her voice even. He gave a small shrug. Looks like it. There was no alarm in his expression, but there was something else, something closer to curiosity. Ava nodded once, placing the folded cloth down on the service tray before straightening her apron with a quick, practiced motion. Her steps remained measured as she moved across the floor, passing between tables, her presence quiet, unobtrusive, just another part of the hotel's rhythm. But as she approached the front, the details sharpened. The man in the suit turned slightly, his eyes scanning the room with a kind of focus that did not wander, that did not miss anything. The manager stood beside him now, his usual confidence replaced with something more careful, more deliberate. When Ava reached them, the manager cleared his throat softly. "Ava," he said, his voice controlled but not entirely steady. "This gentleman is asking for you." Ava's gaze shifted to the man in the suit. Up close, his expression was neutral, composed, the kind of face that revealed nothing unless it chose to. "Miss Brooks," he said, his voice calm measured. "We need a moment of your time." Ava did not react immediately. She had been asked for her time before. Usually it meant a schedule change, a complaint, something small that needed to be handled quickly and quietly. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her tone respectful but direct. The man shook his head slightly. "No problem," he replied. "Just a conversation." The words were simple, but the weight behind them did not match the tone. Ava glanced briefly at her manager, who gave a small nod, as if to confirm that she should go. There was no explanation in his eyes, only expectation. Ava inhaled slowly, steady, then nodded once. "All right." The man gestured toward the hallway leading to the administrative offices, his movement precise, not rushed, but not optional either. Ava followed, her steps quiet against the change in flooring, the polished marble giving way to a softer surface that absorbed sound instead of reflecting it. The hallway felt different from the dining area, more enclosed, more controlled, the air cooler, the lighting sharper. Behind her, the sounds of the restaurant faded, replaced by a quieter kind of silence, one that carried intention instead of absence. The man did not speak as they walked. Neither did Ava. The only sound was the faint rhythm of their steps and the distant hum of the building's systems working behind the walls. They stopped outside a closed door, the nameplate beside it polished, the letters catching the light in a way that made them stand out without drawing attention. The man reached for the handle but paused for a fraction of a second, turning slightly toward Ava. "Before we go in," he said, his voice still calm, "I want to be clear. This is not disciplinary." Ava held his gaze, her expression unchanged. "Then what is it?" she asked. The man studied her for a brief moment, as if measuring something that was not written down anywhere. Then he answered, simply, without emphasis, "A decision." The words settled between them, quiet but heavy, and for the first time since she had stepped away from her section, Ava felt something shift inside her. Not fear, not expectation, just a small, precise awareness that whatever waited behind that door did not belong to the routine she had walked into that morning. The door opened with a soft click that sounded louder than it should have in the stillness of the hallway, and Ava stepped inside without hesitation, her eyes adjusting quickly to the shift in light as the space revealed itself in clean lines and quiet order. The office was larger than it needed to be, but not excessive, everything placed with intention, from the dark wood desk to the single-framed photograph resting near the corner, angled just slightly toward the chair behind it. The air felt cooler here, filtered, controlled, carrying none of the warmth from the dining floor. The man in the suit stepped in after her, closing the door gently behind them, the sound sealing the space in a way that made the outside world feel suddenly distant. Ava stood near the center of the room, her posture straight, her hands resting lightly at her sides, not defensive, not uncertain, simply present. The leather chair behind the desk turned slowly, almost silently, and Daniel Whitmore came into view. He was not the same man from the night before. The looseness was gone. The unfocused gaze had sharpened into something precise, something controlled. His suit was immaculate, every detail aligned, his expression composed in the way of someone used to being seen, to being listened to. But there was something else, something subtle beneath the surface, a hesitation that did not belong to power. Ava recognized him immediately, but her face did not change. No surprise. No reaction that would give the moment more weight than it already carried. Daniel stood, not quickly, not dramatically, just enough to acknowledge her presence in a way that felt deliberate. "Ava," he said, her name steady this time, clear, not slurred or uncertain. It settled into the room differently now, like it had found its place. Ava inclined her head slightly. "Sir." The distance between them held, not physical, but something quieter, something shaped by everything that had not been said the night before. Daniel glanced briefly at the man in the suit, who stepped forward and placed the leather folder on the desk with the same careful precision as before. He opened it, turning it so that the documents inside faced Ava, though she had not moved closer yet. "I asked you a question last night," Daniel said, his voice measured, controlled, but not cold. "I asked if you would come with me." Ava did not answer immediately. She remembered the moment, the open car door, the warmth spilling out onto the cold street, the quiet space where a choice had been offered without pressure. "And I said no," she replied calmly. Daniel nodded once, as if he had expected that. "You did." A brief silence followed, not uncomfortable, not forced, just present, allowing the weight of the memory to settle before moving forward. Daniel rested one hand lightly against the edge of the desk, his fingers tapping once, softly, then stilling. "Do you know who I am?" he asked. Ava met his gaze directly, her expression unchanged. "Yes," she said. There was no elaboration, no shift in tone, just the acknowledgement of fact. Daniel exhaled slowly, a controlled breath that did not quite carry relief, but something close to it. "Then you know I do not make decisions lightly." Ava's eyes flicked briefly toward the open folder, the neatly aligned pages, the printed lines that suggested something official, something final, then back to him. "What decision?" she asked. The man in the suit stepped forward slightly, turning one of the pages with careful precision, the paper making a soft sound as it moved. "Miss Brooks," he said, his tone professional, measured, "this hotel is part of Whitmore Holdings." Ava did not react. The information did not surprise her. It fit. It made sense in the way things often did after the fact. Daniel watched her closely, not for recognition, but for something deeper, something that might reveal how she processed what came next. "Last week," he continued, "I signed documents transferring full ownership of this property." Ava's gaze remained steady, her posture unchanged, but something inside her sharpened, a quiet awareness aligning with the words as they formed. The man in the suit turned the folder slightly more toward her, one page now clearly visible, a signature. At the bottom, bold, precise. "Effective this morning," he said, "the hotel has a new owner." The room seemed to hold its breath, not in drama, not in anticipation, but in the stillness that comes just before something shifts from possibility into reality. Daniel's voice followed, softer now, but no less certain. "That owner," he said, "is you." The words did not echo. They did not need to. They settled into the space between them, quiet and complete, and for the first time since she had stepped into the room, Ava did not move, did not speak, did not even blink, as if the moment itself required stillness to exist. The silence did not break immediately after the words were spoken. It settled instead, deeper, heavier, like the room itself had decided to pause and wait for something that had not yet caught up, and Ava stood exactly where she was, her eyes fixed on the document in front of her, not because she doubted what she had heard, but because her mind was moving through it carefully, step by step, refusing to rush something that did not belong to impulse. The paper lay still on the desk, the signature at the bottom sharp and deliberate, the kind of line that did not leave room for uncertainty. Ava's fingers did not reach for it. Not yet. She lifted her gaze slowly back to Daniel, her expression unchanged, but her voice, when it came, carried a quiet weight that had not been there before. "That does not make sense," she said, not dismissing, not rejecting, just stating the distance between the reality she knew and the one being placed in front of her. Daniel did not react defensively. He did not argue. He nodded once, as if he had expected that exact response. "It did not make sense to me either," he admitted, his voice lower now, less controlled in the way that mattered. Ava's eyes flicked briefly toward the man in the suit, who remained still, professional, unaffected, as if this moment was just another transaction, another set of papers moving from one hand to another. But Ava knew it was not that simple. Nothing about this was simple. "Why?" she asked, the question direct, stripped of anything unnecessary. The word hung in the air, precise, unavoidable. Daniel took a breath, slower this time, his hand resting against the edge of the desk again, but not tapping now, just there, grounded. Because you did something no one else did, he said. Ava did not move. She did not interrupt. She waited. You stayed. He continued, his eyes holding hers, not in command, not in expectation, but in something closer to honesty. Everyone else in that room had a reason not to. They had roles, policies, boundaries, excuses that made sense. You did not use any of them. Ava's gaze softened by a fraction, not in agreement, but in recognition of the memory he was referring to. The cold air outside. The open car door. The space where she had chosen to help without asking what it would return. That is my job, she said quietly. Daniel shook his head once. No, he replied. Your job ended when the shift did. The words settled between them, not as a correction, but as a distinction. Ava exhaled slowly, her eyes dropping briefly to the desk before returning to him. So you are giving me a hotel, she said, the phrasing simple, almost understated compared to the weight of it. Daniel did not smile. I am not giving you anything, he said. I am placing something in the hands of someone who already understands what it means to take care of people when it is not required. The room remained still, the air carrying the faint hum of the building behind the walls, steady, constant, grounding. Ava's fingers finally moved, reaching forward to the edge of the desk, not to take the document, but to touch it lightly, just enough to confirm its presence, its reality. The paper did not shift. The ink did not change. It remained exactly what it was. And if I say no, she asked, her voice even, her eyes lifting to meet his again. The question was not defiant. It was necessary. Daniel held her gaze for a moment, then nodded once. Then nothing changes, he said. You go back to your shift. I signed the property over to someone else. The building continues exactly as it has. Ava absorbed that, the simplicity of it, the absence of pressure in the way he said it. No persuasion. No urgency. Just a choice placed clearly in front of her. The man in the suit closed the folder halfway, as if the decision could be contained again if needed, his movements precise, respectful of the space the moment required. Ava's hand remained on the edge of the desk, her fingertips resting lightly against the surface, her breathing steady, controlled. She did not look at the document again. She did not look at the man in the suit. She looked at Daniel, not as a billionaire, not as a name attached to buildings and contracts, but as the man who had sat in a booth the night before, unsteady, unseen, and had reached for a hand without knowing what it meant. 1 week, she said slowly, the words forming with care. You made this decision in 1 week. Daniel nodded. I made it the moment you said no, he replied. The answer landed differently than anything else he had said, quiet but precise, and Ava felt it, not as pressure, not as expectation, but as something else, something that did not ask for anything in return, just recognition. The room held that silence again, but this time it was not waiting. It was offering space, and in that space, Ava stood still, her hand resting against the desk, her eyes steady, as the shape of her life shifted just enough that it could no longer return to what it had been before. The room remained still, but something beneath the silence had shifted, not in a way that demanded attention, but in a way that could not be undone, and Ava felt it settle into place with a quiet clarity that did not rush her, did not pressure her, just waited. Her fingers lifted slowly from the edge of the desk, the contact breaking without hesitation, without reluctance, as if the decision had already begun forming long before this moment had arrived. She took a small step back, not to distance herself, but to see the space more clearly, to place everything where it belonged in her mind. The document remained open, unchanged, the signature still bold at the bottom, the weight of it resting not in the paper, but in what it represented. Ava's gaze moved once more across the room, not searching, just noticing. The framed photograph on the desk, a younger version of Daniel standing beside a building that looked new, untouched. The lines of the office, precise, controlled, designed for decisions that affected people who would never step inside it. The man in the suit, still waiting, still composed, his presence steady but not intrusive. Then her eyes returned to Daniel. You said nothing changes if I walk away, she said, her voice calm, even, carrying no edge, no resistance. Daniel nodded once. That is correct. Ava held his gaze for a moment longer, measuring not the offer, but the intention behind it. That is not entirely true, she replied quietly. There was no challenge in her tone, just observation. Daniel's expression shifted by a fraction, not defensive, not surprised, just attentive. Ava continued, her voice steady. Something already changed. Not the hotel. Not the ownership. You. The words settled into the room without force, but they carried weight in a way that did not need emphasis. Daniel did not respond immediately. His hand remained still against the desk, his posture unchanged, but his eyes reflected something that had not been there before, something closer to acknowledgement than control. Ava exhaled softly, her shoulders relaxing by a degree so small it could have been missed. You are not doing this because of me, she said. You are doing this because of what you saw in yourself when I said no. The man in the suit glanced briefly at Daniel, then back at the folder, as if recognizing that this part of the conversation did not belong to him. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly, not in resistance, but in recognition. He did not deny it. He did not confirm it either. Ava stepped forward again, but this time her movement was different, not hesitant, not automatic, but intentional. She reached for the chair in front of the desk and pulled it back slowly, the soft sound grounding the moment before she sat down, her posture straight, her hands resting lightly in her lap. The shift was subtle, but it changed the dynamic of the room. She was no longer standing, no longer waiting. She was choosing to stay in the conversation. If I take this, she said, her eyes steady on Daniel, then I do not take it as a gift. Daniel nodded once, almost immediately. It is not a gift. Ava continued, her voice calm but firm. I take it as responsibility. The word landed with clarity, with definition. Daniel's gaze held hers, and for the first time since she had entered the room, there was no distance in it, no separation of roles or titles, just recognition. That is exactly what it is, he said. Ava leaned back slightly in the chair, her fingers interlacing loosely, her mind moving through the implications, not in fear, not in doubt, but in understanding. The hotel, the staff, the systems she had moved through quietly, unnoticed, now shifting into something she would have to see from every angle. The weight of decisions, the faces of people who would depend on those decisions. It was not overwhelming. It was precise, defined. Then I have conditions, she said. The man in the suit straightened slightly, the folder opening again with a soft movement, a pen appearing in his hand, as if it had been waiting for this exact moment. Daniel did not interrupt. He did not question. He simply nodded. Go ahead. Ava's gaze did not leave his. No one here loses their job because of this transition, she said. Not the ones who show up. Not the ones who do the work. The condition was simple, but it carried the weight of every quiet morning, every late shift, every person who moved through the hotel without being seen. Daniel responded without hesitation. Agreed. Ava nodded once, absorbing the answer, then continued. And the policies that keep people from helping when they should be allowed to help, she added, her voice steady. Those change. Daniel's expression shifted again, not in resistance, but in consideration, as if he was recalibrating something that had long been set in place. Then he nodded. We will review them. Ava watched him for a second longer, measuring the sincerity not in his words, but in the way he held them, then gave a small, decisive nod of her own. The man in the suit extended the pen toward her, the document turned fully now, the line for her signature clear, waiting. Ava looked down at it, her eyes tracing the space where her name would go, the ink still empty, still untouched. She reached forward slowly, her fingers closing around the pen with a steady grip, not tight, not hesitant. The room held its silence again, but this time it was not heavy. It was clear, open, like a breath that had been waiting to be taken. Ava lowered the pen to the paper, her hand steady, her movement deliberate, and as the ink met the page, the line she drew was not rushed, not uncertain, just clean, precise, and final. The pen left the paper with a soft, almost inaudible sound, but the moment it created did not disappear with it. It remained, settled into the room with a quiet finality that did not need acknowledgement, and Ava placed the pen back onto the folder with the same care she had used to pick it up, her fingers releasing it without hesitation as if the act itself had already been completed long before the ink touched the page. The man in the suit stepped forward immediately, his movements precise, practiced, closing the folder with a gentle motion as if sealing something that had been decided beyond question, his eyes scanning the signature briefly before nodding once. Not to Ava, not to Daniel, but to the process itself. "It is done," he said, his voice calm, professional, the words carrying a weight that did not need emphasis. Ava did not respond. She remained seated for a second longer, her hands resting loosely in her lap, her gaze steady, not on the document now, but on the space in front of her, as if allowing the reality to settle without forcing it into place. Daniel exhaled quietly, the sound subtle but noticeable in the stillness, his posture shifting by a fraction as if something he had been holding had finally been released. He moved around the desk slowly, not in a way that asserted control, but in a way that closed the distance between them without imposing it. When he stopped, it was not directly in front of her, but slightly to the side, giving her space even now. "Miss Brooks," the man in the suit began, his tone shifting slightly to something more formal, more structured. "As of 10:42 this morning, you are the sole owner of this property and its operations under Whitmore Holdings transfer agreement." The phrasing was exact, deliberate, each word placed carefully, but Ava did not react to the formality of it. Her attention moved elsewhere, not outward, but inward, aligning the statement with the reality she had just chosen. She stood slowly, the chair sliding back with a soft sound that marked the transition more clearly than any words could. The room felt different now, not larger, not smaller, just redefined, as if the boundaries had shifted in a way that changed how everything inside it existed. Ava adjusted her posture slightly, her shoulders settling into a natural alignment, not rigid, not relaxed, just steady. "Then the first thing I do," she said, her voice calm, measured, "is go back to work." The man in the suit paused, his expression neutral but attentive, as if recalibrating expectations that no longer applied. Daniel's gaze held hers, and for a brief moment, something close to a smile touched the edge of his expression, not broad, not obvious, just a small acknowledgement of the consistency he had recognized from the beginning. "Of course you do," he said quietly. Ava nodded once, then turned toward the door without hesitation, her steps measured, unchanged, as if the weight of what had just happened had not altered the rhythm she carried. Her hand reached for the handle, pausing for a fraction of a second before she looked back, not at the man in the suit, not at the document, but at Daniel. "You said nothing changes," she said. Daniel met her gaze. "Yes." Ava held it for a moment longer, then gave a slight shake of her head. "Something does," she replied softly. She did not explain. She did not need to. Then she opened the door and stepped out into the hallway, the cooler air brushing against her skin as the sounds of the hotel returned, faint at first, then clearer with each step she took. The transition was seamless, almost invisible, but it was there. The hallway felt the same. The lighting had not changed. The distant hum of the building remained constant. But Ava's presence within it carried a different weight now, not because she moved differently, but because the meaning of her movement had shifted. As she walked back toward the dining floor, the sounds grew louder, the clink of cups, the murmur of conversations, the soft rhythm of a place in motion. She stepped out onto the floor, her gaze scanning the room briefly, not as a server checking tables, but as someone seeing the entire space at once, the patterns, the flow, the details that connected everything together. Marcus looked up from across the room, his expression curious, questioning without words. Ava met his gaze for a brief second, then nodded once, a small gesture that did not explain anything, but carried enough to shift something in the way he straightened slightly, sensing that something had changed even if he did not yet understand how. Ava moved forward, her steps steady, her hands already reaching for a coffee pot resting near the service station. She lifted it with the same care as before, moving toward a table where a guest waited, unaware of anything beyond the need for a refill. "Would you like some more coffee?" she asked, her voice calm, even, unchanged. The guest nodded, and Ava poured, the dark liquid filling the cup in a smooth, controlled stream, the steam rising in soft curls that caught the light. Nothing in the action suggested anything extraordinary. Nothing in the room paused or shifted. The world continued exactly as it had. And yet, beneath the surface, Something had already begun to move, quiet, steady, like a current that did not announce itself, but changed everything it touched. The coffee pot felt the same in her hand, the weight familiar, the warmth steady against her palm as Ava moved from one table to the next, refilling cups, clearing plates, her motions unchanged in precision even as the meaning behind them had shifted into something larger, something she did not need to announce to understand. Around her, the dining room continued its quiet rhythm, the low hum of conversation blending with the soft clink of porcelain and silver, the subtle choreography of staff and guests unfolding without interruption. No one stopped. No one turned. The moment in the office had not followed her out in any visible way, and that was exactly how she wanted it. At the far end of the room, Marcus approached, a tray balanced carefully in his hand, his eyes flicking toward her again, searching for something that had not been there before. He slowed as he reached her side, lowering his voice slightly. "So," he said, the words stretching just enough to carry curiosity without pressure. "What did they want?" Ava did not stop moving. She set a cup down, adjusted a fork that had shifted slightly out of place, then straightened, her gaze meeting his for a brief moment. "A meeting," she replied simply. Marcus raised an eyebrow, waiting, but Ava had already turned slightly, her attention returning to the next table, her movements continuing without pause. The answer was not a lie. It just was not the whole story. Marcus watched her for a second longer, then nodded to himself, accepting what was given, even if he sensed there was more beneath it. "Well," he said quietly, stepping back, "looks like you survived it." Ava gave the smallest hint of a smile, barely there, then continued on, her steps carrying her toward the service station where a stack of clean cups waited to be arranged. She placed them one by one, aligning them carefully, the soft contact of porcelain against metal precise, controlled, the sound grounding in its consistency. Across the room, the manager stood near the front desk, his posture different now, more attentive, his gaze shifting occasionally toward Ava before quickly returning to whatever task he was pretending to focus on. The change was subtle, almost invisible, but it was there. He knew something. Maybe not everything, but enough to understand that the balance had shifted in a way that would not return to what it had been. Ava did not acknowledge it. Not yet. Instead, she moved through the space as she always had, her presence quiet, her attention focused on the details that others overlooked. A guest raised a hand slightly, and she was there before the gesture fully formed, her voice calm, her tone steady, her movements efficient without being rushed. Time passed without announcing itself. Minutes folded into each other, the rhythm of the room steady, predictable, and yet beneath it, something new had begun to take shape. Not in sudden changes or visible declarations, but in the way Ava's gaze lingered just a fraction longer on the interactions between staff, the way she noticed the hesitation in a new employee's movements, the way she adjusted without being asked, smoothing over small inefficiencies before they became problems. It was the same instinct that had guided her before, but now it extended further, connecting pieces that had once existed separately. Near the entrance, a guest paused, his expression uncertain as he looked toward the seating area, unsure where to go. Ava saw it immediately. She stepped forward, her path intersecting his without interruption. "Good morning," she said, her voice warm but composed. "Table for one." The man nodded, relief flickering briefly across his face. Ava guided him toward a seat, her pace measured, her attention present, ensuring the transition felt seamless, natural, as if the uncertainty had never existed. As she placed a menu in front of him, her hand paused for a fraction of a second against the table. The surface cool beneath her fingers, the reflection of the overhead lights clear and undisturbed. She straightened, her eyes scanning the room once more, not searching, not reacting, just seeing. The entire space moved within her awareness now, not as separate tasks, but as a whole system, each part connected, each action influencing the next. Behind her, the glass doors opened again, letting in a brief wash of cooler air before closing softly. Ava did not turn this time. She did not need to. Whatever had arrived earlier had already found its place. The shift was no longer approaching. It was here, woven into the fabric of the room in a way that did not disrupt, but redefined. Ava picked up another coffee pot, the metal warm against her hand, and moved toward the next table, her steps steady, her posture unchanged, her presence as quiet as it had always been. And yet, in the way she carried that quiet, there was something new, something that did not demand to be seen, but could no longer be overlooked by the things that truly mattered. The rhythm of the dining room never broke, not even for a second, but something beneath it had settled into a new shape, quiet and certain, and Ava moved through it with the same steady pace, the same controlled precision, as if nothing had changed, even though everything had. The coffee pot in her hand was lighter now, nearly empty, and she tilted it carefully over the last cup at the table, watching the dark liquid settle, the surface stilling into a smooth reflection that caught the overhead lights without distortion. "Thank you," the guest said, his voice casual, unaware of the moment he was standing inside. Ava nodded once, a small, natural gesture, then straightened, her hand adjusting the edge of the cup by a fraction of an inch so it aligned perfectly with the saucer. It was a small thing. It always had been. But now she saw it differently, not as a task, but as a standard. Across the room, Marcus paused again, this time not calling out, not asking questions, just watching for a second longer than before, as if trying to understand something that had not been explained. Ava met his gaze briefly, then shifted her attention back to the room, her awareness expanding beyond individual tables, beyond isolated tasks, taking in the entire space at once. The entrance, the flow of guests, the timing between orders and service, the subtle delays that no one mentioned but everyone felt. It all connected now. It all mattered. Near the front desk, the manager stepped forward, his posture careful, his expression measured as he approached her, stopping just close enough to speak without drawing attention. "Ava," he said quietly, his tone carrying a formality that had not been there before. She turned slightly toward him, her posture unchanged. "Yes." He hesitated, just for a second, as if recalibrating the way he addressed her. "If you have a moment," he said, "there are a few things we should go over." Ava held his gaze, her expression calm, then nodded once. "We will," she replied, her voice even. "After the lunch rush." The answer was simple, but it landed with clarity, setting a boundary without resistance, defining a priority without explanation. The manager blinked once, then nodded, stepping back, accepting the timing without question. Ava turned away before anything else could be said, her steps carrying her toward another table, her focus returning to the immediate, the present, the work that still needed to be done. The shift continued, the pace building gradually as more guests filled the space, conversations layering over each other, the sound rising just enough to create energy without chaos. Ava moved through it all with quiet control, adjusting, anticipating, smoothing transitions before they became visible. A plate arrived a few seconds early, and she held it back just long enough to align with the rest of the order. A guest reached for a napkin that was not there, and it appeared before the motion completed. No one noticed the corrections. No one needed to. That was the point. At the far end of the room, sunlight shifted through the tall windows, casting a warm glow across the polished floor, the reflections stretching and moving with the angle of the light. Ava stepped into it briefly, the brightness catching against her uniform, softening the edges of the moment, then moved through it, unchanged. The doors opened again, guests arriving, leaving, the cycle continuing without pause. And somewhere within that cycle, the ownership of the space had shifted completely, not through announcement, not through declaration, but through presence, through the quiet, consistent way Ava held the room together without asking for recognition. Time moved forward, the lunch rush rising and then slowly beginning to settle, the intensity easing into something steadier, more manageable. Ava returned to the service station, setting down the now empty coffee pot, her fingers resting against the metal for a brief second, feeling the last of the warmth fade. She looked up, her eyes moving across the room one more time, not searching, not checking, just seeing. Every table, every movement, every small detail that made the space what it was. Then she turned slightly, her reflection catching in the polished surface of a nearby column, her figure framed by the light, steady, composed, unchanged in appearance, but not in meaning. She did not smile. She did not speak. She simply stood there for a moment, her breath even, her posture aligned. As the room moved around her, And in that quiet stillness, the truth of it settled completely, not loud, not dramatic, just certain. She had not taken the place by force. She had not claimed it with words. She had simply stepped into it the same way she had stepped into every moment before, with care, with presence, with a kind of quiet strength that did not ask to be seen. And now, without needing to say it, without needing to prove it, the space itself recognized her. The hotel did not change its shape. The lights did not shift. The world did not pause. But something deeper had aligned.